morning and welcome to the shop. Today's video, sharpening. Okay, let's cover the absolute basics. I have here a ceramic tile glued onto a piece of plywood with a cleat so I can just shove it up against the side of the bench. I have a spray bottle with water. I've glued onto the tile a piece of wet dry sandpaper. This is 250 grit, so it's really good for establishing your initial bevel. The first thing that we need to learn to do with freehand sharpening is to hold the workpiece. So in this case it's a crappy chisel. So what we're going to do is we're going to place the chisel on the sandpaper. Then we're going to put our fingers on top of the chisel with our one finger or two finger or your whole hand, with our hand parallel to the line of the chisel. Then we're going to put our other hand over top of that one. Then we're going to lock our elbows into our side. So we have the one hand down, the other hand over the top. Then we're going to set our angle by lifting and lowering our arms until we get to the right angle that we want on the chisel. And then we're going to rock our body back and forth. We're going to move backward onto our back heel, forward onto our forward foot, back and forth. Right now I've got my left foot forward and my right foot back. My right hand, which is my dexter hand, on top of the chisel and parallel with the chisel, and my left hand across that. Now I'm just using the weight of my hands. I'm not pressing down. I'm just using that weight to stabilize everything and keep the blade in contact with the abrasive. And I'm rocking back and forth. I am not moving my arms. If you move your arms back and forth, then in an exaggerated motion, you're going to be doing this. And that will create a bevel that is convex. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but with how I use chisels, I require a flat bevel on the front and a flat back. So if I were doing the back of the chisel, I would place the chisel flat on the work surface. I would do the same thing. Fingers of my dexter hand on top and parallel, and my other hand to provide the weight and the stability. And I would just rock back and forth. You can rock back and forth also the length of your bench so that you can get a longer stroke. If you're going to do that with the chisel, then you need to reorient your body. I'll switch to my left hand so you can see. With the dexter hand parallel and the other one on top. And then you can rock your body back and forth and maintain that precise angle on the workpiece. If we want to establish a new angle on a tool, we need a protractor and a bevel gauge. We set the protractor to the angle that we want, in this case 30 degrees, and then we set the bevel gauge to the angle of the protractor. Then we can place our bevel gauge besides our sharpening surface, and then we can take our chisel and put it parallel with that, and now we have our angle. So we set the protractor for the angle that we want, 30 degrees. Then we set the bevel gauge to match that. Lock it all in place. Then set the bevel gauge up. Then we match our chisel to the angle of that, set our hands up, double check our angle, and now we can establish the bevel on that chisel at our new angle. And it shouldn't take very long. Most chisels come with an angle somewhere between 25 and 30 degrees, which is, you know, kind of in the ballpark of what you want if you're working with both softwoods and hardwoods. So that's our edge after we've established the primary bevel using the protractor and 250 grit wet dry paper. Okay, here's a chisel that used a bench grinder to establish the edge. As you can see, there is a concavity in there, and then there's a flattish edge, and then there's a little flat shoulder against the top of the blade. Okay, here we are with that same blade after 30 strokes on the 250 grit paper. You can see that that concavity is reduced to a teeny bit and that we have a very good, very flat, large bevel already developing. And there we are after another 30 strokes. The bevel is pretty flat. There's a slight remainder of that concavity, but you know, maybe another 30 strokes and that will be gone completely. Okay, so after another 40 strokes, we've got a flat bevel. To keep this surface working, I use excess water and then I just wipe it with a paper towel, and that removes the schwaff, the ground off metal, leaving you with good paper, abrasive paper to work with. Okay, once I've established my bevel, in order to finish it and go to the next grit of paper, we're going to have to reestablish our holding angle. But in order to make that easy, if you put plenty of water on your surface and put your chisel down and then raise your chisel up, you can see that the water squeezes out in front. Once the water stops squeezing out in front, you know that that bevel you've made is completely flat on the surface of the abrasive. If you go any further, you'll notice that the water over here and over here sucks in behind. So you can rock it forward and squeeze out the water in front. See it squeezing out there? And then as you come up, you can see it suck back in around the edges. So once you've got that correct angle, then you can rock your body back and forth and go back to the next grit of paper, making your blade cleaner and sharper. You will also notice that I am not lifting up and pulling, lifting up and pulling. I am going a braid forward and backward, forward and backward. As long as you have that angle right, you're not going to rip up the paper. You're just going to be cutting that bevel. If you tip too far forward, you will, of course, cut the paper like that. But if you maintain the right angle, you'll be able to go back and forth with no problem. Now, a lot of people talk about making a burr. Some metals will form a burr and other metals will not. This metal forms quite a hard burr. I'm not sure if we can see it on the video here, but it is there. You can definitely feel it. if you don't get a burr, don't worry about it. It probably just means that the metal isn't going to form a burr. And the other thing is that if you're pushing forward, that burr that's forming on the edge is going to abrade off, because it's going to be pushed under a little bit and cut off on the forward stroke and then reform on the pull stroke. So I wouldn't worry too much about getting a burr. Once you have a noticeable burr, just flip your workpiece over and work the flat back a bit, and you'll see the burr come right off the front. It'll just peel right off, usually with 2, 3, 4 strokes. Sometimes even just 1 stroke is enough to get rid of it. Okay, so that is finished now to 800 grit wet dry paper and 5 or 10 strokes on a leather strop with green 6000 compound. And you can see that is quite literally a mirror finish. Is that chisel sharp? Well, let's go over to the edge of the bench here. I'll lay the chisel flat on the back, and you can see that that is able to take shavings off of my bench mega fine. If I turn the chisel over and use it bevel down and put that flat bevel on the surface, I can take off this paint stain. Just like that. Okay, the last point is when your blade becomes dull, and it'll become dull, these inexpensive chisels that I've got here, they get dull very quickly. But when they become dull, it's very easy to resharpen. You take your highest grit of paper or stone, put a bunch of water on it, establish your angle, lock yourself in place, give it about 10 strokes, and that edge will be completely re-established, just like that. Then all you have to do is 3 or 4 strokes with a strop, and you're good to go. As you can see, it doesn't take very long at all to resharpen a chisel once it's sharp. Okay, one last thing. A plain blade is no different than a chisel. It's just wider, and that just makes the job a lot easier, because you've got a huge amount of water squeezing out in front. It's very easy to see when it's at the right angle. It's also a large blade, so that if you want to establish the angle with the bevel gauge, it's very easy to do so. And then you've got all that surface area to work with. You can get 3 whole fingers on this blade, and I can grab it completely with my other hand, allowing me to rock back and forth very comfortably with a very relaxed grip. Even the thinnest of chisels is the same deal. You just put it on there and push the water forward until you see it, or you parallel it with your bevel gauge, and then you put your finger down it, lock your hand in place, and rock back and forth. The key to this system is getting that easy rocking motion. Don't use your arms back and forth. You'll, especially with the thinner blades, you'll get side to side motion, you'll get forward and backward motion, you'll get skew, you'll wind up with a blade that looks like, I don't know, terrible. Feel free to like and share this video, and if you find it useful, let me know in the comments. Thanks kindly.